On a summer afternoon on Friday the 13th of June 1997, hundreds of people in New Delhi, the capital of India, settled into their seats at the Uphaar Cinema to watch one of the year's biggest Bollywood films. It should have been an ordinary day at the movies to provide a simple escape from the heat and the bustle of the city. But instead, it became one of the world's deadliest cinema disasters in history as fire broke out inside the building, trapping audience members in their seats as the smoke filled the theatre. Within minutes, panic and chaos claimed the lives of 59 people, with many of them being children. And what followed was not just a story of a fire, but of negligence and corruption, which ignited a decades-long fight for justice. The Uphaar Cinema was one of Delhi's most popular theatres. Opened in 1973, it was a modern facility for its time, offering balcony seating, air conditioning, which was an absolute must during the excessive heat of the summer, and of course, a very large screen. By the 1990s, it had become a favoured destination for families and filmgoers. The cinema was owned by Ansell Theatres and Club Hotels, part of the wealthy and influential Ansell Brothers real estate empire, which represented the steady growth of India's middle-class leisure culture. But behind the glamour, problems had been building for years. Investigations would later reveal that the cinema had been poorly maintained, with numerous violations of safety codes. Exits were blocked, fire equipment was either missing or non-functional, and the unauthorised modifications to the building had reduced safe escape routes. The 1990s also marked a time when fire safety in Indian public buildings was very poorly regulated, as the enforcement was very lax and corruption was widespread, which meant tragedies often followed. Delhi itself had already experienced several deadly fires, but very little had been done to address the systematic risks and do something to prevent future accidents. The Uphaar Cinema would soon become the next victim and expose the devastating consequences of this negligence on a massive scale. The theatre was showing the Hindi film Border, a patriotic war drama that had quickly become a nationwide sensation, and as the screening began at 3 p.m, the cinema was jam-packed with over 1,300 people inside. At around 4:55 p.m, just as the film reached its interval, an electrical transformer outside the cinema caught fire. Witnesses later reported hearing an explosion, and as sparks flew, they ignited the surrounding materials. The fire spread into the cinema's basement parking area, where cars and upholstery provided fuel, and within moments, thick black smoke began to fill the building. For those inside, the experience was terrifying. The audience on the ground floor managed to escape relatively quickly, but those in the balcony were not so fortunate. The balcony's exit doors had been locked or blocked, an idea which initially was designed to prevent people entering without tickets. While it was successful in keeping people out, it failed in letting people out to safety in case of emergency. The emergency lighting failed, leaving the upper floors in darkness as the smoke thickened, forcing families to blindly scramble to try to find a way out, only soon to discover that the stairwells and walkways had been obstructed by extra seating, which was installed to increase the profits. Survivors described scenes of horror. Some people collapsed in the aisles as they were overcome by smoke. Others clung to their loved ones in the darkness, unable to breathe as parents tried to shield the children with handkerchiefs and shirts, trying to do anything to protect them, but the fumes were too strong. In the chaos, people tripped and fell, which created stampedes that blocked the narrow passageways even more. And for those who tried to force the locked exits open, they found them immovable, and within minutes, the balcony became a death trap. Many victims died not from burns, but from suffocation. The toxic smoke filled the lungs quickly, knocking people unconscious before help could reach them. By the time firefighters arrived and managed to control the blaze, 59 people were already dead. More than 100 others were injured, suffering from burns, smoke inhalation, or injuries sustained by the stampedes. Outside, the distraught relatives gathered as bodies were carried out. because many of them were children who had gone to enjoy a film on the final day of exams at school. News of the fire shocked the whole of India. Questions were immediately raised. How could a modern cinema, in the heart of the capital city, become such a death trap? Investigators revealed a series of safety violations and illegal modifications to boost profits. Exits had been locked, gangways narrowed by extra seats, and the fire alarm system was not functioning. To make matters worse, the transformer that sparked the fire had a history of malfunctioning, yet despite the issues, it was never properly maintained, fixed, or even replaced. Public anger grew towards the owners, Sushil and Gopal Ansal. As influential businessmen with connections to politicians and developers, many feared that they would escape accountability, but the victims' families refused to accept the silence and demanded answers. Among the victims' families were Neelam and Shekhar Krishnamurthy, who had just lost their 2 children in the fire. They became the faces of the campaign for justice and became the founders of the Association of Victims of Uphaar Tragedy. Over the following decades, they led relentless legal battles against the Ansal brothers, arguing that negligence and greed had been the causes of the deaths. The case dragged on for years through India's overburdened courts, and in 2007, 10 years after the fire, the Ansal brothers were convicted of negligence and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Despite the sentencing, their sentences were repeatedly reduced or overturned on appeal, leading to public outrage. In 2015, they were fined and only given brief terms in prison, prompting accusations that India's wealthy and elite could and would always evade true punishment, which they deserved. The victims' families refused to ease off. Every setback in court was met with renewed campaigning with greater backlash. Petitions were filed, protests were organised, and due to this determination, appeals made their way to the Supreme Court. The Krishnamurthys, once ordinary parents, became campaigners for accountability in a country where the powerful were rarely held to account. Their persistence eventually led to a final judgment in 2021, nearly 24 years after the tragedy. The Supreme Court of India ordered the Ansal brothers to pay a fine and serve 7 months in jail. It was a partial victory, but for many, it felt too little, too late. For the families, however, the verdict was not just about punishment, but about recognition and proving that the lives lost at Uphaar still mattered. The Uphaar Cinema Fire remains one of the darkest chapters in India's modern history, as it exposed levels of corruption, negligence, and the pursuit of profit, which quickly combined into deadly consequences. The fact that most victims died not from flames, but from being trapped in smoke-filled halls due to blocked exits and locked doors, was seen as a large-scale, systematic failure. The tragedy did spur some positive reforms. Fire safety rules for public buildings in Delhi and other cities were tightened, as authorities introduced stricter building codes, mandatory fire drills, and more rigorous inspections. Yet enforcement remained inconsistent, and fires in public venues continued to claim lives in the years that followed, ranging from the Padma Priya marriage hall fire, where 62 wedding guests died in 2004, to the Kumbh Konam school fire, where 94 children lost their lives just a few months later in June 2004, a painful reminder that the lessons from Uphaar had not been fully learnt. Culturally, the fire has never been forgotten. The images of bodies carried out of the theatre, the grief of parents, and the decades-long battle for justice became symbols of both tragedy and resistance. The Krishnamurthy story was later adapted into a Netflix series, Trial by Fire, which brought renewed attention to the case and highlighted the extraordinary resilience of victims' families who refused to be silenced. Today, the site of the Uphaar Cinema still stands abandoned, serving as a crumbling reminder of the disaster. But for many in Delhi, it is not just an empty building, but a graveyard of memories, and a place where an ordinary day at the movies turned into a nightmare that scarred the city forever. The Uphaar tragedy was not simply the story of a fire. It is the story of how negligence can turn joy into horror, how the powerful can evade accountability and responsibility, but also how ordinary families, who are bonded by grief, can fight for justice for decades against the overwhelming odds. It also serves a reminder that safety regulations are only as strong as their enforcement, and that complacency can turn a place of entertainment into a place of mourning in a matter of minutes.